The next presentation is Reclaim Ohio, and Carol Zimmerman will carry that alone.
I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk about my passion. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Ohio Department of Youth Services, DYS. We've reinvented ourselves from a bureaucracy into a market-driven system. But in order for you to understand why that was necessary, I want to paint you a before and an after picture. So let's go back before Reclaim. You're a judge in a big city. Now in front of you is Dion. He's one more statistic, a black male teenager who can't seem to stay in school and out of trouble. Now a solitary parent has lost control of Dion and all the other children. Dion's been on probation, but now he's hot-wired a car and he's been joyriding around downtown Akron. Now, you look at this child, what's your finding? Grand theft auto. What do you, the judge, want to do with Dion? Do you want to teach his mom how to parent before she loses all the other kids? Do you want to send Dion to alternative school? It doesn't matter. Your court's out of money. But the juvenile prison system is free to the county. There's actually a fiscal incentive to send Dion to juvenile prison. Now you're worried. The institutions are so overcrowded, you expect he'll get more education from the sophisticated inmates than he'll ever get from the staff, but it doesn't matter. Money is going to drive your decision to commit this child to a juvenile prison. Now you're a second judge, East Anywhere, Ohio. Before you is Mike. He's 13 years old, and you'd think he was a kid until you looked in his eyes. They're as cold as death, and they're as dead as the 7-year-old girl he raped and strangled. You're finding aggravated murder, rape. What do you want to do? You worry that DYS institutions are so overcrowded that Mike's not going to get any treatment, but your worries don't matter. You may go home tonight cursing the state for our inadequacies, but you're still going to commit Mike to DYS. Now shift your before picture and you're sitting in my chair. Assistant Director, Juvenile Prison System. You're attempting and failing to keep 2,500 teenage felons in institutions running at 180% of capacity. You're struggling to keep those offenders in toilet paper and clothes, let alone programs. Now, what kind of programs do you want for an offender like Dion? What kind of programs do you want for a murderer like Mike? It doesn't matter. You don't have the money, you don't have the staff, you don't even have the room. You can't keep staff safe from kids, and you can't keep kids safe from each other. You wonder why the judges can't sentence some of these kids to local alternatives. Instead, they just keep dumping kids into DYS as if we were some kind of human landfill. Now shift your scene. Enter the innovation. Reclaim Ohio. Now, using the total quality process, we figured out that we couldn't save the kids alone. We couldn't solve the state problem alone. We couldn't solve the local problem alone. We had to have a shared problem. That was that communities lacked resources to treat kids in the local community. DYS lacked resources to sanction kids who needed to be out of society. Now, to solve this, we had to create a shared state-local partnership in a unique way, in a novel way. So what we decided to do was define the state's responsibility in financial terms. We eliminated totally the institutional budget. We decided that we were going to fund 25% of all teenage felons as if they were going to be committed to me at the going rate state per diem. We took the majority of that money, we pushed it out to the judges. They could then buy state incarceration with me, or they could buy a local alternative. Now, what did that mean? Well, in practical terms for Dion, it meant that Judge Sandra Robinson, and yes, she's real, could put Dion in a community-based program that's designed to shore up African-American families. For Mike's still coming to DYS, but now we're in full-scale reclamation, sex offender programming, and a special program designed for murderers. Therefore, Reclaim is a strategic human reclamation program. And how do we know this? Because we're market-driven now and performance measures are important. Overcrowding's down from 2,500 kids inside down now below that magic 2,000 mark. In 1 year, our private sector's been able to provide so much more in effective and cost-effective programs. They served 8,000 kids last year, many more than I ever could have served in expensive prison beds. So unlike most prison systems, in Ohio, we are under no pressure to expand expensive juvenile prison beds. Ohio is building servant leaders. Reclaim Ohio has made allies and even business partners of county officials who were once our biggest rivals and our harshest critics. But the most heartening part of Reclaim is that at least we've had the courage to try a different way of doing business with the vision, the commitment, and the hope of reclaiming two of Ohio's most precious resources, our children and our public peace.
Thank you. Question, Jack?
I have the impression that there are somewhat similar programs in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and elsewhere. Could you talk about the provenance, how this originated, and how it differs from other states?
One of the things we learn in quality is you have to benchmark so that you build on the shoulders of giants. So we looked at many of these other programs, and what we found with most of them is they're very inbred. They try to solve the state problem by looking at the juvenile prison population. So for example, if you look at the Wisconsin paradigm, what they looked at was they said, how many kids are going to be in prison? Well, let's fund that. Let's take that as our pot and distribute that money. Well, what you find out is that doesn't work. If you're a local person, and let's say that you've been very good about trying to fund local alternatives, so you're not sending very many kids to prison, but let's say your fellow judge next to you has been sending a lot of kids to juvenile prison. If all you do is base this on who you are traditionally sending, you're actually punishing people who are committed to community corrections and rewarding people who have traditionally sent a lot of youngsters to juvenile prisons. So first of all, you can't base it on that. The other thing is we always think we can get something for nothing. We think we can take some kids out of the institution and somehow be able to shift money. Oh, heck, I got institutions running 400 kids in an institution that's designed for 200 kids. If you take 50 kids out, I'll save a couple of bars of soap, but I'm not going to save enough money that I can push that out for some sort of community corrections program. So we had to be courageous enough to go in and say, the first year it's going to cost you 33% more. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to say I can shift money away from institutions and make it work for community corrections. But we got bipartisan support for that because people thought they're being honest. They saw dumping in other systems. And we were very upfront. We said, we don't want to do that. This is an expansion. This is going to cost you money, but it's going to cost you $20 million to build an institution and $8 million in perpetuity to run it. That's a really bad short-term investment on a long-term problem.
Yes, Lynn.
Although you have information on how many of the offenders were diverted from the jail population,
Yes.
and I realize how young your program is there any, are there yet any numbers on recidivism at all with the young people in terms compared to before?
We have a University of Cincinnati study that's now about 2 years old, tracking our kids in the first program that came up in 1994. 87.4% were successfully diverted from juvenile prison, going through the local Reclaim Ohio programs.
You diverted them into a local program.
They successfully completed the local program and had no more court immersion, so they didn't get any, they were stopped there.
Which would be compared to what?
Probably 75% that you might lose normally.
The reverse. Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
And
David.
I'm still a little unclear. Does that mean the recidivism rate went from 75% to 13%?
If you're talking about kids that are generally just going out on probation,
Yeah.
they come into the court, and the court doesn't have a lot of options, had very few options before
Right.
Reclaim. So what they did is they sent the kid on probation, sent the kid home, put the kid in foster care, or
Right.
sent him to me. If they're staying out on traditional probation, we found that most of our kids on traditional probation, 3/4 of them were coming into the system, getting further involved, a misdemeanor, a felony, going down the road.
Right.
So in this case, we stopped almost 90% of them from following that path.
Is your juvenile crime rate down?
Our juvenile crime rate is up. Our adjudications and our felony level crimes are rising with our population at roughly 4% a year. So now, last year I had 14,300 juvenile felons. This past calendar year, 15,800 juvenile felons. So the universe of kids in trouble is bigger. Our slice of the pie that's coming to the juvenile prison system is getting smaller.
Max, a last question.
Very brief one. you've got, in this area, you've got a lot of egos and you've got a lot of turf. And if you do one thing so often, someone else feels, well, their program's going to be diminished and lost. Very briefly, how does that work?
Humility is an underrated value in state government. And what we've found is that we've become servant leaders to the judicial community, which is a very powerful lobby, and we're a very powerful home rule state. So now the judges see me as their servant. I provide something to them. They know they're smarter than I'll ever be about treating a lot of these kids, and that's okay with me because they are smarter than me in treating a lot of these kids and treating them locally. So instead of being my rival, someone that didn't perform for them the way they wanted me to, they now see me as someone who is accountable to them.
One last quick question.
Very quickly, has anyone made any effort to find out why so many young people are being drawn into this system? In other words, does your program have a component that looks at how can we reduce the number coming in as opposed to addressing them once they're there?
One of the things I think we've done very badly as an industry in corrections is that we don't count very well. We don't do inventory control as well as a lot of businesses do. The first thing that we did was we required, and we have very few requirements on this program, but one of the things we require is good data. So if you're keeping a kid locally, if you're sending a kid to prison, you've got to tell me age, sex, race, past offense history on this kid. What we're finding is we're able to pull out some really good demographics about the kind of kids that are at risk and at what age and what their social situation is. That's allowing us for the first time to go into counties, and we have some special grants that we give for technical assistance, so that people can say, gosh, 65% of my kids are car thieves, and they seem to be car thieves because they're in this milieu. And this is how I'm going to address it under reclaim, which will be totally different for another county. So between the technical assistance and finally having some good data, not just going from gut, but head and gut at the same time, we'll really be able to attack the problem as we would with any problem that was, I mean, if we had the number of kids sick, percentage-wise, that we've gotten going to juvenile prisons, we'd be holding a telethon. And we need to be doing the same thing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your